Anxiety disorders, they're one of the most common mental health challenges out there, but they're also super misunderstood. The good news is our understanding of them has changed a lot. Today, we're going to demystify these conditions and really explore the modern and honestly hopeful path to effective treatment. Let's dive in.
Okay, let's kick things off with just one number, 7.3%. What's that? Well, that's the percentage of people around the entire globe who are living with an anxiety disorder right now. Think about that for a second. This isn't some niche issue. It's a massive, common global health challenge that affects hundreds of millions of people.
So, here's what we're going to cover. First, we'll look at just how big this problem is, but also how hidden it can be. Then we'll get into what these disorders actually are. After that, a little history lesson on why the old way of treating them is, well, outdated. Then the good stuff, today's gold standard treatments. And finally, we'll walk through what the path to getting better actually looks like.
All right, let's dive into the core of the problem. Even though anxiety disorders are the most common psychiatric condition in the world, they have this incredible ability to fly completely under the radar. And right here, this is where the trouble often starts. Most people's first stop is their family doctor. But for a whole host of reasons, these conditions just get missed or misidentified way too often. And that gap, that initial failure to recognize what's going on, means that so many people are left struggling without the support they desperately need.
Okay, so when we say anxiety disorder, what does that actually mean? What are we really talking about? This next part is all about breaking down the definition, the different types, and the really complex mix of reasons why they happen in the first place.
Look, an anxiety disorder is way more than just feeling stressed out before a big meeting or worried about a test. We're talking about a whole group of conditions defined by this persistent, relentless feeling of worry and restlessness. And it's not just in your head. It shows up physically with very real symptoms like a pounding heart, tight muscles, and just this bone-deep exhaustion.
Anxiety disorder isn't just one thing. It's really an umbrella term for a bunch of different conditions. You've got panic disorder, which is all about these sudden, terrifying attacks. Then there's generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, which is more like a constant, low-humming worry about, well, everything. Social phobia is that intense fear of being judged, and of course, there are specific phobias, where the fear is zeroed in on one thing, like spiders or flying.
So what's the cause? You might think it's one single thing, but the science is really clear on this. It's not. The way we understand it now is what's called a biopsychosocial model. It's a complicated dance between your genes, your life, and your environment.
Let's dig into that a little more. Yeah, there's definitely a genetic piece to the puzzle, about a 30% heritability rate. But that's only part of the story. Things like trauma in your childhood, really stressful events happening in your life right now, and even parenting behaviors, they all play a huge role in tipping the scales. Now, to really get why today's treatments are such a big deal, we got to take a quick look back at how things used to be. For a very long time, the first response to anxiety was a class of drugs that, as we now know, came with some pretty serious baggage.
For decades, if you went to a doctor for anxiety, you'd probably walk out with a prescription for something called a benzodiazepine. And look, they can work fast in a crisis, but over the years, a mountain of evidence has piled up showing some major risks, and that's completely changed the treatment guidelines.
So, why the big switch? Well, the evidence just became too big to ignore. For one, you can develop a tolerance to these drugs and even become dependent on them. But it gets more serious. Big reviews of studies found links to a higher mortality rate, and get this, a 1.55 times increased risk of dementia. On top of all that, they do nothing for depression, which so often goes hand in hand with anxiety. The bottom line was clear. The risks just didn't justify the benefits for long-term care.
Okay, so that brings us to the really good news. After all that research, we now have incredibly effective, safe, evidence-based treatments that are considered the absolute gold standard for helping people with anxiety. Today's best treatments really stand on two main pillars. On one side, you've got medication, specifically drugs called SSRIs and SNRIs. These work by helping to rebalance the brain's chemistry. On the other side, you've got psychotherapy, and the champion here is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. You can think of CBT as physical therapy for your brain. It's not about just talking, it's about actively learning new skills to change the thought patterns and behaviors that keep anxiety going.
But do they actually work, and how well? Well, the data is pretty striking. If you look at the research, psychotherapy on its own is effective. Medications on their own are even a bit more effective. But look at that last bar. The absolute most powerful, most effective approach we have
is when you combine the two, medication and therapy, working together. That's the winning ticket.
And just so we're all on the same page about the meds, today, the first thing doctors reach for are SSRIs and SNRIs. Why? Because they have a much, much better balance of benefits versus risks for long-term treatment compared to those older benzodiazepines.
Okay, so we know what the treatments are, but what does that journey actually look like for someone going through it? In this last section, let's walk through the actual, practical steps on that path forward to feeling better.
To make this a little more real, let's talk about Alice. She's a 48-year-old dentist from one of the case studies, and she was really struggling with this constant worry and physical stuff that was messing with her work. Her story is a great example of what a successful treatment path looks like.
So her journey, it followed these key steps. First, she got a real diagnosis and learned about what was happening to her. Step 2, she started her treatment. In her case, an SNRI medication in CBT. Step 3 is all about patience. You have to monitor how things are going, because the meds can take anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks to really start working. And then finally, and this is so important, you keep going with the treatment even after you start to feel better.
And this right here, this is maybe one of the most important parts. Getting better, what doctors call remission, that's not the end of the road. It's standard practice, the absolute best thing to do to continue the medication for another 6 to 12 months after your symptoms are gone. This is all about preventing a relapse and managing the long-term nature of these conditions.
So let's wrap this all up. What's the big picture here? Yes, anxiety disorders are a huge, serious challenge, no question. But the single most important takeaway from all of this is a message of genuine hope. We have safe, we have effective, and we have research-backed treatments that offer a real, reliable path to recovery.
And that leaves us with one last big question. We have the tools, we know what works. The real challenge now is bigger than any one person. It's this. How can we, as a society, close that critical gap between the millions of people who are struggling and the incredible care that's available to help them? Something for us all to think about. Thanks for tuning in.